Press cross to select. Loading. Options bar.
C&T Publishing, leaders in books and products for quilters and crafters, proudly presents the following instructional and entertaining DVD.
Welcome to the world of inkjet printing on fabric. Hi, I'm Lynn Kulish. If you've never printed on fabric before, I'm going to show you everything you need to know to get started. And if you have printed on fabric, I'll be showing you some more techniques that you can add to what you already know. With printing on fabric, you can print your photos to use in quilts and other soft crafts, or you can use them as a starting point for brand new works of art. These are just a few examples of the kind of things that you can do with your photos. You can create a collage quilt. You can use them for scrapbooking. These were printed on canvas and you get a wonderful soft texture. Looks almost like a painting. There's wonderful soft organza that you can see through. And you can use your photos in three-dimensional crafts and other soft objects, like this clock, or this wonderful fabric bowl. You can even print on silk to make your own scarves. The first thing you need to print on fabric is a printer, and it's very important that you use only inkjet printers. The processes that I'm going to be talking about don't work with laser printers that use dry toner and heat. You want an inkjet. And these are two models that you can use. This first one is called a DeskJet. It's a very inexpensive model. This is an older one. It was the first printer that I started using, and it still works absolutely fine today. A step up, a little more expensive, is this larger DeskJet, but its advantage is that it prints fabric and paper up to 13 inches wide. Another option for printing on fabric are these all-in-ones, and it doesn't matter what brand you use. What I have here are an Epson and two Hewlett-Packards. What's great about these machines is that they're very versatile. You can print, you can copy, you can scan, and on some of these you can even fax. So on all of these, the lid lifts up and you have the bed for scanning and copying. This is an older model that I've been using for a number of years and I like a lot. This one's a newer printer that it's designed more for printing photos, but it also works great for printing on fabric as well. The next thing you need to know about are inks. There are basically two types of inks used by inkjet printers. There's a dye-based ink that's used by most Hewlett-Packards and other printers. It's a water-soluble ink, so it's really important to use pre-treated fabric sheets, which I'll be talking about in a minute. Epson uses a pigment-based ink, which is often called Durabrite. These inks are a little less susceptible to washing out and fading, but they can rub off and they're a little more expensive. And that's all you need to know about inks. The third thing you need is fabric to print on. To go through an inkjet printer, fabric needs to have a backing to stabilize it, and it needs to have a treatment on it to make the inkjet inks permanent. These are some of the examples of fabrics that you can buy that are already pre-treated, ready to go. There are many more available. This is actually just a very small sampling. These are all 8.5 by 11 sheets. You can also buy them in larger 13 by 19 sheets that go through that larger printer that I showed you. And if you want to print longer pieces of fabric, you can buy them in rolls. These are 8.5 by 11, and these are 13 inches wide. In addition to all those other fabric sheets I just showed you, some companies make fabric sheets that have a fusible web already attached, so you can run this through the printer, take off the backing, and fuse it to your fabric. You can also find what's called a peel-and stick, which has an adhesive backing, and it works in a similar way, where all you have to do is run it through the printer, peel the backing off, and you can adhere it to fabric and other surfaces. You can buy the pre-treated fabric sheets in a wide variety of fibers, and these are just a few examples that I have here to show you. The most popular are probably the Pima cotton or the cotton poplin. And as you can see, what's wonderful about these fabrics is that they really retain their soft hand. If you want a little more texture to your fabrics, you can buy fabrics like denim or broadcloth, twill, or even canvas. And some of those are great because they really give you a nice painterly effect and have a real soft look. To go in another direction, you can also print on silk. And again, as you can see, the hand remains soft, and these are really wonderful, supple fabrics. The last one I want to show you is called organza, and I think you can see just how sheer and translucent it is. This makes a wonderful overlay for layered effects. The last thing I want to talk about with the fabric sheets is how you can create your own. This is a product that I used called Bubble Jet Set, and it's used to make the inkjet inks permanent. It takes a little more time to make your own fabric sheets, but it is a little more economical, and you can use any fabrics that you like. The way to use it is you simply pour this into a shallow container, dip your fabric in, and then hang your fabric to dry. The solution is reusable, so all you have to do is pour the unused solution back into the bottle to use it again another time. Once the fabric is dry, you're going to need to attach some kind of backing to it so that it will go through the printer. What I normally use is freezer paper. I usually use the freezer paper that I buy from the grocery store. I just cut it to size. But you can also buy pre-cut freezer paper sheets that are already 8.5 by 11, so all you have to do is iron them onto the back of the fabric. So these are just two examples of the fun things that you can do when you treat your own fabric with the Bubble Jet Set. This one was printed on a light yellow fabric, and as you can see in the white areas, you see the fabric through the flower. And that's because printers don't print white ink. There's no such thing. Anywhere where an image is supposed to be white, the printer doesn't print anything. So you get a real great view of the textured fabric that the image was printed on. This is another example. The fabric I used for this one was a white on white print. And especially in these green areas, you can really see the print of the fabric showing through. The other thing I want to mention on this one is you can see it started to print, stopped, and printed again. What happened is that I didn't have the freezer paper securely attached to the fabric, and so the fabric started to jam in the printer. What I did is I took the fabric out, I took a piece of masking tape, I ran the masking tape along the bottom edge, and then I wrapped it to the back. And once you run your fingers through it to make sure it's a tight seal, you can now run this through the printer without any worries. And just keep in mind that no matter how you pre-treat your fabric, whether you pre-treat it yourself or buy the packaged sheets, your fabric creations will last longer if you keep them out of the direct sunlight. There are a lot of resources available, so don't feel like you have to remember absolutely everything that I'm telling you today. Not only is there a PDF on this DVD that includes resources and handy tips, but there are books available that you can look at as well and refer to. Okay, now we're actually going to get into using some fabric. Anything that you can copy onto paper, you can copy onto fabric using one of these all-in-ones. It's a real immediate result, it's real easy, and you don't even need a computer. If you teach classes or work with kids, it's a great activity because anyone can do it. So we're going to start with copying, and I'm going to show you how I made this quilt using souvenirs from a trip to Japan. This is one example of the kind of things that you can do, but you don't have to go this big. And this is one that I made using a telegram that I received for one of my birthdays. And there I am. Every model of All-in-One is a little bit different, but I'm going to show you how this one works just to give you some ideas of the kind of options you can expect to see. So I'm going to select the copy menu here, and then all of our options are going to be showing up on this little screen. So the first one that's available is number of copies, and I'm just going to leave that set here because I know it's set to 1, and we're always only going to be making 1 copy at a time. The next thing we want to look at is quality. Now this one has 3. It has best, it has normal, and it has fast. Most printers will have some combination of these 3. Yours may have more. The ones you want to know about are normal, which is the setting you're going to be using when you're printing on fabric, and you want to know about fast, or some printers may say fast draft, and that's the one you're going to use when you do tests. So I'm going to set it to fast because we're going to use that in a minute, and I'm going to say OK. The other thing I want to look at is options. We're going to take a look at that. Most printers will have some combination of lighter or darker or some sort of brightness, and we're going to be adjusting this when we run some tests so you can see how it affects your printouts. And that's all you need to know about making copies. Printing on fabric is different than printing on paper, so it's really important to do some tests on the fabric sheets that you're actually going to use. I usually sacrifice one of my pre-treated fabric sheets to use as a test sheet every time I print a new project. And this is an example of the kind of thing that I do. I actually make notes right on the fabric sheet so I can remember what I've done. So let me show you how I do this. If I have small items, like this, I can simply place them on the glass, close the lid, and make my copy. If I don't like what I've done and I want to make some adjustments, for example, I want to make it a little bit darker, I simply lift the lid, move the item, and print again. If I'm using something bigger and I don't want to print the whole thing, for example, I have a map, and what I really want to test is just a corner of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay down some pieces of white paper, because remember the printer doesn't copy white, and I'm going to place my map down. Now only this corner of the map is going to print. So when I close the lid and make a copy, I'm going to have just that corner of the map. Now again, if I want to make some adjustments, all I need to do is rearrange my paper, move it down here, place the map down again, feed my fabric sheet through, and it will print on a different corner. So that way I can be sure that what I'm going to print out is going to be what I want. Now that we've done a little test on fabric and we know what we want our settings to be, I'm actually going to start to arrange my fabric collage on the glass. So I'm just going to start placing all of my items down, and just remember that what you want to show on the bottom needs to go down first. So I'm just going to start arranging these, and they're going to overlap a little bit, and that's fine. Anything where there's going to be a little opening, I'm just going to put that map in the background, and I'm going to close my lid. Now at this point, what I want to do is I'm going to make a copy onto scratch paper. So what I have loaded in my printer is scratch paper, and because I know that this printer is what's called an up and over, which means the fabric feeds in, it comes around the back, and then it comes out to print, I know that I have to have the wrong side up. So my paper's loaded correctly. I'm going to go back to my copy menu. I'm going to look at the quality because I want this one to be a fast draft. I don't want to waste ink because I just want to see how things are arranged. So I'm going to select fast and click OK. And now I'm just going to press black because I want a black and white copy. No need to do it in color. Okay, so now that I have my test copy, if I'm not quite happy with the way things are arranged, all I need to do is open the lid, rearrange them. Maybe I want to turn some things around. Close the lid, and I can do this as many times as I need to until I get everything arranged the way I like it. Just remember, you want to use your fast quality and your black and white print. Now that we've done all of our testing and you're happy with the arrangement of the items on the screen, you're ready to print on your fabric. So the first thing to do is to take any scratch paper out of the paper tray. When you're printing with fabric sheets, you always want to print with just one fabric sheet at a time. Before you load the fabric into the printer tray, make sure that there's no lint on the fabric sheet, because if there's any lint, the ink will spray on the lint and not on the fabric. So when you brush the lint off, you're going to have white spots. The other thing you want to check for is to make sure you don't have any stray threads that can jam in the printer mechanism. If there's any stray threads, be sure you cut them off, don't pull them. I'm going to place the fabric in the paper tray, fabric side down. Remember, I mentioned earlier, this is the style of printer where the fabric feeds in, comes around the back, and comes out, called up and over. So I know that I have to have the fabric side down when I load it in. I'm going to close the paper tray. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my quality, because now that I'm printing for real on the fabric, I want to make sure I have it set to the normal quality. So I'm going to press that and say OK. And now all I need to do is press color to copy. And here's my finished copy. After you've printed the fabric, you need to let it dry. And it's important that you read the instructions that came on your particular brand of fabric sheets, because different brands have different drying requirements. After it's dried, what you want to do is you need to take the backing off so you can rinse it. So I'm going to turn this over, and just very carefully I'm going to start to peel the backing sheet away from the fabric. And I'm going to hold the fabric down with my hand and peel very gently, because I don't want to distort the fabric by pulling too hard. So just work your way along the edge, and if you need to, slide your finger in, and just keep pulling until you can get a whole edge free, and then hold it down with your hand as you peel the rest of it very carefully back. After you remove the paper backing, you need to rinse the fabric sheet to wash away any excess ink that remains on the surface. The different brands have different rinsing instructions, so be sure you read the package before you do the rinsing. If you don't rinse at this point, what can happen is that if you get any water on the image, even a little bit of water from a spitting steam iron can lead to water spots, and after all the work you've done, you don't want that to happen. You're not limited to flat items like pictures and maps. You can also copy items that are 3D. Basically, anything that you can place on the glass of the copier, you can copy. If you're at all worried that it's a little messy or you might scratch it, you can use a clear transparency sheet that you get from the office supply store. So let me show you a couple of quilts to give you a better idea. This is a quilt that I made for a friend whose daughter's a ballerina. So she lent me her little slippers and her magic wands, and I just placed them on the bed of the copier and copied them in a reduced size. I'm going to move these over because I want to show you one more quilt. This is another one that I made from a friend, and I used the puzzle pieces from one of their kids' games. You can see I got the cow, I've got the goat, I have a train, I have a fire truck. So I hope this gives you some ideas of things that you can use on quilts. And then I have a few more things to show you to give you some more ideas. And here are some of the other things that you can copy onto fabric. This is one I used with buttons and spools of thread with some lace in the background. And this is a fresh Gerbera daisy with some greens behind it. I've got shells and ribbon again with the lace. Now this is one where you might want to put a transparency sheet down on the glass first, because the cut veggie is a little bit messy but very fun. And this last one, since we're talking about high tech, I thought we had to get a little high tech, and these are memory chips and cables. You may have noticed that I've been copying a variety of items as I've been showing you how to use these printers. So I want to say a quick word about copyright, and I'm actually going to read it because I want to make sure I get it correctly. If you use, copy, or alter anything that you did not create, you need to make sure that it is for your personal use only and not for financial gain. If you have any doubts or questions about whether or not it's okay to use something, get permission from the person who created the item you are using. I want to show you how you can scan items using your all-in-one. Now, the advantage of scanning is that, one, you have more options when you create the scan, and two, since you're creating a digital file, that's a file that you can store on your computer and either manipulate it before you print it or just save it on your computer to use later. I'm going to switch over to this printer to use for the scanning because it does a much better job with 3D items. Because I love art supplies and I wanted to make a cover for my sketchbook, I'm using art supplies to make my scan. So the first thing I'm going to do is just open the lid and one by one just start placing all the items onto the glass. So I'm going to start with my little mannequin and just place him face down because he's sort of the center of attention here. The next thing I want to add are some watercolors. Now, as soon as I tip this over, some of them are going to fall out, so I'm going to just catch them here. And I don't want this all the way in the picture, so I'm just going to place it so it hangs off the edge. And then I'm going to take some of these little cakes that have fallen out and arrange them around the glass. I think I'm going to go with my acrylic paint next, so I just have 2 tubes. And I'm just going to put those face down. Remember that it's going to be scanning from the bottom, so whatever you want to appear in the picture has to be face down. I think we'll try some brushes and a pen next. So I've got an assortment of brushes and a pen. And we're just going to place those on here and just kind of arrange things as you like. We'll go with some little watercolor tubes. Throw those in there. I've got some pastels. We'll try those next. I always like to try and place the things that stay put first because other things like this are going to roll. And so the stable ones will help keep them in place. And last thing I'm going to use are some paint sticks. And we'll just get those kind of nestled in there. So now there's a lot of open space here, and because this has dimension, this lid is not going to close. I'm just going to take a piece of fabric and cover the top, and I'm ready to scan. Now that everything's on the scanner, I need to start my scanning software. This is what the software looks like that comes with this printer. Yours may look a little different, but it'll still work about the same. So the first thing I need to do is tell the software that I want to get the images. And I need to tell it that I want to get it from the scanner. Now I have a few printers hooked up, so I need to tell it which printer I want to use. If you only have one, you may not need to answer this question. Now it's asking me what I'm scanning. Do I want to scan a document or a picture? And basically this is a picture. So picture's selected, and then I'm going to hit scan. Okay, now for some reason it's decided it wants to focus just on that area. So I'm going to move it over, and then I'm going to grab these little handles and enlarge it so I see the whole screen. Now if I had wanted to, at this point I could have cropped it, but I like this whole image, so that's what I'm going to keep. Now I mentioned earlier that the advantage of scanning over copying is that you have more options. And this is the screen where you can see what those options are. And the first thing that I want to talk about is resolution. At this point, it's important to check your scanning resolution. By clicking on this arrow, it's going to show me what it is. But before I tell you what to set it, let me explain a minute what it is. Digital images are made up of pixels, which are little dots of color, and are measured in pixels per inch. And what you need to know right now is that for printing on fabric, you want a resolution of 150 to 200 pixels per inch. So I'm going to change this from 100 to 200 before I move on. Now, just to show you one of the other adjustments you can do, I'm going to select color adjustment and show you what it does. By moving this little magnifying glass around, I can change the overall picture, the overall color of this whole image. And so just for fun, I'm going to make it kind of magenta. Now, everything here is set, so I'm just going to hit accept. Now that the scan is complete, it's asking me if I want to do another scan, and I don't, so I'm just going to click on no. And now it's processing that scan, and it's going to show up on my screen for me. Now that I have my scan on the screen, I can click on it and go into edit. Now at this point, I can do some minor editing on the file if I want to. I can rotate it and flip it, or I can crop it. But again, I like it the way it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a save as, so I can rename it to a file that I can remember. So I'm going to call it Art Supplies. And I'm going to save it. And now I'm ready to do anything that I want with it. Copying on Fabric is a great way to get your images directly onto Fabric, but if you have your printer connected to your computer, you're most likely going to be printing from your computer. So what I want to do is just take you on a quick tour of the options you're likely to have when you print. Once you've selected your printer, you're generally going to come up to a screen that looks something like this. Now I have a number of printers, so I'm going to make sure that I select the printer that I'm currently using, and then I'm going to click on Preferences. What I want to do is just quickly go through the different tabs so you can see how you're going to want to set your computer when you print on Fabric. So the first one to look at is the print quality. Now these are similar to what you saw when we were copying on Fabric, and you could select them directly from the printer. As with copying, you're going to want to use a fast draft anytime you're making a test print, and you're going to want to use normal when you're ready to print on Fabric. For paper type, automatic or plain will be fine. Under layout, check to make sure that you have the correct paper size, which will generally be 8.5 by 11. You can also change the orientation from portrait, which is primarily vertical, to landscape, which is primarily horizontal. It just depends on what kind of photo you have. Under the Features tab, the one I want to show you right now is Advanced Features. And what's really interesting about this one is that, and I think a lot of people don't know that this is even here, is that if you're printing on silk or a very light fabric, sometimes too much ink comes out of the printer for those fabrics. And you can adjust the ink volume to something lighter so the ink won't bleed when you print. So we'll go OK here. Under Color, this is where you'll be able to set your printer to print in grayscale if you want to do a quick test print and you don't want to use your colored ink. You can also adjust the saturation, brightness, and color tone. The one I think is important for you to know about is saturation. I mentioned earlier that when you're printing on fabric, the fabric's absorbent, so it tends to absorb more color than when you're printing on paper. So there are cases when you might want to increase the saturation to more vibrant. Let me click this off so you can see. The problem with this is all you have to go by is a little sample picture. You don't have your real image. So when I adjust it to vibrant, you can see that it gets brighter, but you're going to have to do a test to see how it affects your actual picture. The last tab I want to show you is Services. And I'm going to click on here, and this is going to take a minute to open up. Okay, and what you have here is if you start to have any problem with the quality of your printouts, this is the first place to check. You can calibrate your printer, you can clean the print cartridges, which is something that you should do occasionally, and you can print a test page to see how which will help align the print cartridges. The other thing that's very helpful is that you can check your estimated ink levels. Now, I've been using this printer a lot, so you can see that the colored inks are almost low and almost out, but since I just put in a new black ink cartridge, that's full. So again, these are properties that you get anytime you print, no matter what type of program you're printing from. If you want to do some basic editing on your photos, there are two programs that are readily available and easy to use. If you have a Mac, you can use iPhoto, which comes on your computer, or if you have a PC like I do, you can use a program called Picasa that you can download free from the internet. This is what the screen looks like. It organizes all your photos for you and allows you to do a little bit of editing. So let me show that to you. I'm going to select this photo, and by double-clicking on it, it's going to take me into the screen that allows me to do some editing. And I'm just going to walk through these tabs to give you an idea of what kind of things that you can do. In this first screen, the basic editing, you can do things like crop or straighten. If it's a picture of a person and they have the red eyes that you get from the flash, you can correct the red eye, or you can adjust the color and the contrast. On the next tuning tab, I can adjust the lighting, and let me show you how, if you can see how the picture changes, you can see that it's getting much lighter, especially in the background. Or I can change the highlights, and again, it's making the light areas lighter. Or I can do things like darken the shadows. So these functions are great when you have a picture that's not quite good, but not too bad. What's also really fun is that I can start to get into some basic effects here. And I'm going to pick one just to show you because I really like it. And what it does, if you can see, is that it's turned the picture to black and white except in the center. And I can control how much of the picture is in color and how much is in black and white. The program I'm going to show you in the next few segments is Photoshop Elements. It's an easy-to-use photo editing program that's available for under $100. A similar program is Corel's Paint Shop Pro. It's also available for under $100. Both of these are available on the internet, and you can usually download a trial copy that you can use for about 30 days for free to see if you like these programs. I'm using Photoshop Elements on my PC, and it's version 6. You can also get a version that runs on a Mac. I'm going to be presenting a lot of information in these next few segments, so you might want to take a break here and print out the PDF that's on this DVD that has a quick start reference guide for Photoshop Elements. So let's take a quick tour of the Photoshop Elements screen. This top area up here is called the menu bar. And I'm just going to click through these options just to give you an idea of what's here. Don't worry about remembering them all. We're going to come back and use them in the next few segments. Under File, some of these are going to look familiar. If you use any other Windows programs, or actually Mac programs as well, this is where you're going to open your files, you're going to save them, you're going to print from here. Next option is where you're going to be doing editing. And the three things I want you to notice, because we'll be coming back and using them, are the undo, the redo, and the revert. These are your safety valves that are going to allow you to always come back to your original picture so you never have to worry about having made a mistake. The next one under Image is where you're going to be able to start to do things with your photos. And later on, we're going to come back and talk about how you rotate your photos, and we're going to talk about resizing. Enhancing, this is where you're going to be adjusting your color, your lighting. This is where you're going to start to have a lot of fun. Layers are a way of building up images in layers so that you can work with them more easily. And we'll be doing a couple of examples with them, and you'll begin to really understand how useful they are. Selecting allows you to select or deselect parts of your photos, and you'll see how we use that. Filters. Filters are so much fun. I'm a little sad that I'm only going to be able to show you a couple of filters. Once you start playing with Photoshop, this is an area you're going to be going to again and again. The View option allows you to zoom into a picture for a closer look, to zoom out. The other option I want to show you here under Windows is Images. This is really nice that if you're working with a lot of photos, you can arrange them in a tile format so you can see them all, or you can go back to the view that I had before, which is a cascade, to work on one image at a time. So that's the basic menu bar. The other part of the screen I want to show you is called the toolbar. And this is where you're going to find all the tools that you're going to use when you're working on your photos. And we're going to go through some of those in the next few segments. What I want to mention now is that almost all of the tools here have corresponding options in the option bar that relate to that specific tool. Now, I already have an image open on my screen, and when I'm working in Photoshop, the first thing that I always do is to save my photo to a new name. That way, I know that the image is safe and I can do anything I want to the image that's on the screen, and I don't have to worry about what I'm doing to it. So I'm going to go up to File, and I'm going to select Save As. Now, when you save your files, you have two options that are good for photos. You can save them either as JPEGs, or you can save them as TIFFs. The difference is that a JPEG is a more compressed file. It's smaller on your computer, but every time you save it, it compresses a little bit more and it starts to lose a little detail. A TIFF file is a little bit bigger, but it preserves all of your details. So if you think you're going to be editing a file a number of times, you're better off saving it as a TIFF, even though it takes a little bit of space. So my file is called Lily's Original, so I'm going to change that and call it Lily's Altered. And I've already set it to TIFF, so all I have to do now is save. Now it's going to come up and ask me a few questions. I don't want any form of compression, because that's what I'm trying to avoid. And a TIFF file can be specific to a PC or a Mac. Always save them as PCs, because then you can open them on either machine. Click OK, and I'm done. Now I can do anything I want to this file, I can do any kind of editing, and I don't have to worry about my original photo. So I've switched to another photo here because I want to talk to you about image size and resolution. So I'm going to go into Image, Resize, Image Size, so you can see what I'm talking about. There are a couple of things that you're going to want to look at when we're having this discussion. You're going to want to look at this pixel dimensions. You want to look at the width and the height of the picture, and you want to look at the resolution. With my digital camera, when I take pictures and download them to my computer, when I open them up at Photoshop, they're always at 72 pixels per inch. And if you remember in the section on scanning, I said that when you're printing on fabric, you want an image resolution of 150 to 200 pixels per inch. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to change the resolution to 200, and you'll notice that these numbers changed. Now I'm going to go back for a minute just so you can get another look. When I change it to 72, these two numbers are going to get big. At 72 pixels per inch, the image is 28 inches by 21 inches. When I change it to 200 pixels per inch, it comes down to a size of about 10 inches by 7 inches. And basically what's happening is those pixels are they're not literally, but if you imagine it, they're kind of being fit into a smaller space. So at 200 pixels per inch, I'm going to get a nice crisp image. There's one more thing I want to show you on this screen, and that's called resampling. And the reason you want to know about this is mostly if you want to make your images bigger. Now what I'm going to do this a couple of times so you can see, but what you're going to want to look at is you're going to want to look and see how the actual dimensions of the image are changing, and also how the pixel size is changing. So say for example, I want to print a very large image. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change this number to say I want it twice the size. I'm going to change it to 20. Now what's happened, and you may have missed it because I was focusing your attention down here, is because I've had this resampling image set, the pixel size changed as well. Now the other piece of this puzzle, so to speak, is that Photoshop has an ability to help resize that image. And when I click on this box here, I'm going to have a few samples. Now don't worry about writing all this down or remembering, because all of this is going to be on that Quick Start Photoshop guide that's on your PDF. When I want to make an image bigger, I'm going to select Bicubic Smoother. And that just allows Photoshop to help create the additional pixels it's going to need to keep this resolution, but that bigger size. So let me change this back again so you can watch the screen and see what's changing. So when I change this back to 10, the height and the width changed, but this pixel dimensions also changed. So I'm going to put it back to 20 because that's the bigger size that I want. If, for example, you have an image that's large to begin with and you want to make it smaller, what you want to do is come down here and pick Bicubic Sharper. And again, it's just an ability that Photoshop has to help you when you're resizing images. I think that covers the basics, so let me show you a few of the things that you can do. I have my lilies. Right now I'm in what's called full edit, but there are two other types of edit that you can do that I think you may find really helpful. One is called guided edit. And if you're new to Photoshop Elements, you might want to give this a try. This actually kind of walks you step by step through the process and asks you what you like to do. So that's one option for editing your photo. What I want to do now is go into what's called Quick Edit. And what I like about it is that you see your photos side by side. So you see your before and you see your after. So what I'm going to do is just show you some of the kind of changes that you can make to either improve your photo or to really turn it into something else. So I'm just going to start at the top with some of these options, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it from one extreme to the other. And that's actually how I learn what these different functions do. I push it to one side and go, well, that didn't do too much. Let me put it back and see what happens. It's lightening the shadows so I can see that it's changing the area in here, but doesn't do too much for where I want to go with this photo. I can try darkening the highlights and see what that does. So I'm going to take it all the way to the extreme, and now I can see that it's made it very dark and the image has become kind of muddy, and I don't like that too much, so I'm going to put it back where it was. Same thing with mid-tone. I'm going to try one end and say, well, that's, kind of interesting. What does it do when I go the other way? Takes it to there. So I'm going to put it back, and I kind of like what it's done because it's really emphasized the different shapes and the different colors of those lily petals. The same thing with saturation and hue. These are really fun to play with, especially when you want to start taking an image away from a realistic look. So saturation, I'm just going to start moving it up and seeing what happens. And you can start to see the colors change back here. And I'm going to push it all the way. And I actually really like it. If you take a look at the before and the after, you can really see the differences. You can see how these have become much darker, different color, much brighter color actually, sorry. Changing hue is something that's really fun, and it's something I really love to play with. What it does is it changes the overall color of the entire image. So let me just show you a few of those changes. And each step just takes it to a completely different color. And if I go the other way, I'm going to scoot through here. If I go the other way, I get a complete different set of colors. And I find those really fun to play with. And I'm going to put it back almost to where it was, but not quite. So I'm going to push it a little bit more into this purple range. I can do something similar with the color temperature. I can make it very warm, or I can make it very cool. And I kind of liked it where it was, so I'm going to leave it there. And the tint works in a similar way. The other option you have here is very helpful, and it's called sharpening. And what's going to happen is I start to move this slider, you'll notice it's going to start to sharpen up, and you're going to see it particularly in the edges of these lily petals. And the more I sharpen, the more extreme it gets. Now, if I were going for a very realistic look, I probably wouldn't sharpen it very much. But I'm really liking the way this looks, so I'm going to keep pushing it farther because I like the exaggeration. So I'm going to leave it about there. And I actually, for what I'm going to be doing next, I really like this image, so I'm going to stop. I'm going to go back to my full edit because that's where I'm going to start to work with it. And before I go any farther, because I really like it, I'm going to stop and I'm just going to save my file. And I've already had it renamed to altered, so now I'm ready to go on to my next step. Now that we have this image that we like, let's have a little fun with it. The first thing that I want to do is I want to make this image appear a little smaller on the screen because I'm going to open up another window here and I want to be able to see both at once. So there are two ways to do that. One is that I can go to View and I can do Zoom Out and it makes it smaller. The other thing that I can do is I can use my keyboard and I can use Control minus, which also makes it smaller. So I'm now going to take this and just move it over to the side. The next thing that I want to do is I want to open up a new blank file. So I'm going to go to File, New, Blank File. And it's going to bring up a little dialog box and it's going to give me some options. It has a number of different sizes preset, so I'm going to go in and select US paper because I want a standard letter size for 8.5 by 11 because that's what prints on my printer. Now I know that this image is at 300 pixels per inch, so I'm going to come back here and I'm going to type in 300 because I want to match that pixel per inch size. I'm also going to check my color mode and make sure that I have it in color. When that's all set, I'm going to click OK. Now I have a new blank document. What I'm going to do is I want to create a new image by copying and pasting the image into here, and then I'm going to show you how you can mirror and rotate your images. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here, I'm going to say Select, and I'm going to select all. Whoops, sorry, I'm in the wrong image. I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to say Select All, and you can see the little, I hope you can see on the video this little line. Sometimes they're called marching ants because that's what they look like. And it means I've selected this entire image. The next thing I want to do is come over here to Edit, and I want to copy it. Once I have it copied, I'm going to click on my blank file, and I'm going to come back here and do Edit, and I'm going to paste it in. And there I have it. I'm going to move it up in the corner because that's where I want to start working on it. Now I already have this image in my cut and paste buffer. This works pretty much the same way as it does with any other kind of program that you use on your computer. If you're used to using an Excel spreadsheet or a word processing program, the cutting and pasting works exactly the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here, I'm going to do Edit, I'm going to paste it in again because I want two of them. And I'm going to move this one up here. But what I want to do is I want to flip this because I want these two to be mirrors. So I'm going to make sure that this one is selected. I'm going to come up here to Edit, to Image, to Rotate, and now I have this little menu here. Now if I want to flip it, I want to flip it horizontally. So if I select this one, I don't know if you noticed, but what it did is it flipped both of these images, and that's not what I want. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to do Undo because I want to undo what I did. Now what I haven't mentioned yet is that every time I copy and paste something into this blank file, I'm creating what's called a layer. And if you look over here, you can see these layers. So when I click on here, I'm in layer 2 because that was the second thing that I pasted into this document. So when I come back up here to Image and I select Rotate, if I scan down a little bit farther, I can start moving my layers independently. So what I want to do is I want to flip that one layer horizontally. And now I have my two images, and if I move them a little closer together, now they're close, and I'm going to switch to my arrow keys on my keyboard because that's going to let me kind of nudge it over. I'm just going to nudge it over so the two touch, and I now have two images that are mirrors. I'm going to do another paste because I want another set of images down here that are going to reflect these two. So there are a couple of ways I can do it, but I'm going to take this route. I'm going to do edit. That's still in my paste buffer, so all I have to do is paste again. And I'm going to bring this one over here. And this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to do image, and I'm going to rotate, and I'm going to come down here. And this time I want to flip it vertically. Did you see what I did? I picked the wrong one. I didn't pick the layers. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to come back here to image. I'm going to do rotate, and I'm going to scan down, and I'm going to do flip layer vertically. Now I can come back in and I can snug this one up, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to use my arrow keys to kind of nudge it into place. And there I have it. Whoops, not quite. I can see a little white line there, so I'm going to nudge it one more time. Okay, I have one more corner to do. I'm going to paste one more time and bring that last corner in. Now I need to do two things. I'm going to do image, rotate. I'm going to flip the layer horizontally, and then I'm going to come back in, and I'm going to rotate, and I'm going to flip it vertically. And that's going to give me my last piece, and I'm going to get it close, and then I'm going to use my arrow keys and nudge it in. And there it is. And now I can show you the postcard that I made using that image. This quilt is called Roses by the Square, and I made this central image using a Photoshop Elements filter. And I want to show you how I did that. Photoshop Elements has a large number of filters, and you can access them in two ways. You can either get to them from the menu bar filter, or you can access them from this sidebar. I usually access them from the filter and just use the pull-down menu. And when I start to work with an image, I may have an idea in my head of what I want to do with it, or I might not. And often I'll just pick filters and try them out and see what they do. That's the way I learn best. And since I've already renamed my file to something else, I can play away at will and not worry about what I've done. But since I've already created this image, I'm going to show you exactly what I did, and then we can talk a little bit more about how you can experiment with filters. So the filter that I used is under Distort, and it's called Wave. Now I thought that was a little bit odd because when I saw wave, I thought it would be something a little more, rolling or wave-like. But what I found is that the wave has different types, and I see different images depending on which type that I pick. And I hope you can see that in the little square there. And because I'm a quilter and I'm used to working with blocks, sometimes I saw a square and went, let me try that. Now this is set, all these values are set to what I used and basically what I discovered when I was experimenting with this filter. And this is the image that's in the quilt. But what I want to do now is just move some of these sliders around so you can see how the image changes and to give you some ideas of the kind of things that you can experiment with. So by just moving it, it starts to rearrange these squares and they're getting smaller. The farther over I go, the smaller I get. And now that's a pretty interesting image, but for what I was trying to do, which was to keep it look like a rose but just break it up a little bit, it was too much for me, so I moved it back to where it was. Same thing happens down here. The more I slide, the more things change. So when you're playing with filters, I just really want to encourage you to have fun, try them out, and just see what you can discover for yourself. This is a new series of lilies that I've just started working on, and I have 3 that I'd like to show you. And what I'd like to do is show you exactly how I made this one that you're looking at right now. So I'm going to be using Photoshop filters, but I'm going to be using them in a slightly different way than I did before, and I'm going to be using layers. Actually, I'm going to be using filters and some of the other features that we've talked a little bit about. So I have my photo open. I've already saved it to a new name, so I'm going to go ahead and start. And because I want to recreate exactly what I did before, I'm going to follow my notes, because for me it's really important that all 3 of these images look like they were created in the same way, because I'm going to eventually put them all together into one quilt. And let me draw your attention over here. I'm going to be using this sidebar area, and if you can see, there's a square here, a circle, and a trash can. And what this does is this square will allow me to create a copy of my layer. The one in the middle allows you to create an adjustment layer, and this third one, the trash can, allows you to delete a layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put my cursor on the layer, drag it up to the square, and it's going to create a new layer for me to start working in. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to Enhance. I'm going to adjust my lighting, and I'm going to select Shadows and Highlights. Now it's automatically set there, so I'm just going to put it back because that's not what I want to do. If you look at this central part of the flower, you'll see that you're not seeing much detail. That part of the flower is actually a little bit overexposed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to darken the highlights and watch. I want you to watch that flower as I move the slider. And as I start to move the slider, you can see that as it gets a little bit darker, I'm starting to see a lot more detail here, and that's what I want. So I'm going to say, okay. Now one of the other things that I'm going to do is, because I know I want to be able to repeat this, and I'm not always really good about writing notes, I'm going to use my layers to actually keep track of my steps. So I'm going to go back up here to Layer, I'm going to select Rename Layer, and I'm going to call it Darken Highlight. So now I'm going to take this layer, I'm going to do the same thing, I'm going to make another copy of it so I can go on to my next step. And so to do that, I want to sharpen up these edges a little bit because I want to pull that flower away from the background. So I'm going to go to Enhance, and I'm going to use what's called Unsharp Mask. This is basically going to do a similar effect to what we did when we were doing the water lilies. So just so you can see what's going on, I'm going to run my slider all the way down, and you can see how the whole image softens up. And as I start to move my slider up, you can see that it starts to take on more definition. And again, it's helping to define it's going to help to differentiate the edges of the flowers from the background, and that's really what I'm trying to do. So now that I've sharpened it, I'm going to say okay, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go up here to Layer and Rename, and I'm going to call this one Unsharp Mask. I'm going to say okay. So one more time, I'm going to take the last layer that I used, and I'm going to pull it up here and create another layer. And this time I'm going to go and use a filter, because now I'm going to start getting into the meat of this. And the filter I'm going to use, it's under Artistic, and it's called Paint Daubs. So when I open up the image with this filter, it comes in an extreme close-up, and it's too close for me to see. So I'm going to use these little plus and minus boxes down in the corner to reduce the image so it fits into the screen so I can see what the filter's doing. So now this is pretty interesting, and this is another filter that I found just by poking around and playing with the different options. This one has what they call brush types, and so I'll pick another one of these just so you can see what some of the other things this does. So if I pick Simple, it's going to take a second here. You can see it takes away a lot of the texture that you were seeing before. And the texture is actually what I really liked about this. So I'm going to go back and put that in. I think what attracted me is I started to see a lot of the lines, and it really reminded me of free motion quilting. And I did the same thing with these other sliders, is I just played around with different settings until I found one that I liked. And you can see how it changes, and it becomes much more defined. And I decided that was actually a little bit too much, so I backed it back off again. So I'm going to slide this back down and put it back where it was, because it's also really important for me to be matching those other images. So these are the settings that I have and the settings that I like. So as soon as it's done, I'm going to say OK. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to come up here to Layer, and I'm going to rename it. And I'm going to call it Paint Daubs, because that's the name of the filter. And it's important for me at this point to really know those settings. So I'm going to type those in so that when I go to do another calla lily, I'll be able to track it. I'm going to say OK. One more time, I'm going to copy that layer, and I have a couple more steps to do. I think this is something we haven't done yet. So I need to go to Enhance, and I'm going to adjust the color, and I'm going to adjust the hue. Because I'm not going for a realistic look, what I found is that by adjusting the color just a little bit, I can start to get this area in here to be this nice kind of peachy color. And I really like the way that looked, so I'm going to hang on to that, and I'm going to say, OK. I'm going to do a quick rename. And I'm going to call this hue. And the setting I used was -23. And that's just the number that helps me identify what I did. And I'm going to do 2 more steps, and then we'll be done, and I'll show you the whole sequence again. One more copy. Something else that you can do with the color is that you can selectively replace color. And because I'm trying to match my other images, this area, these greens are too dark. They don't match what I've already done. So with this little eyedropper, I'm going to click on the dark green, and you should be able to see that right there. And I can come down to these sliders now and adjust the hue, the saturation, and the lightness. So I'm just going to slide these around until I find, there we go, until I find something that matches my other images. And I'm going to click OK. I'm going to do one more quick rename. I'm going to go up here to Enhance. I'm going to adjust the color again. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to up the saturation to about 25. And the reason I'm doing this is I want these images to print out really vividly. And because the fabric's absorbent, what I print out is not going to look as bright on the fabric as it does on the screen. So I just know from experience that I need to increase that saturation just that little bit. Okay, now what I'm going to do so you can really see what I've done, oh, sorry, let me do my quick rename so I know what I've got. And that's saturation 25. Okay. Now see there's a little eye beside each one of these layers. When I click it, it makes that layer disappear. So now I'm back to my original image, and what I want to do real quick is just step through all the layers and turn them back on again so you can see step by step all those changes. So there's where I darken my highlights. There's where I sharpen the edges. That's where I applied the filter. That's where I changed the hue. That's where I replaced the color to lighten it up, and that's where I increased the saturation. All I need to do now is print it out. Labels are really easy to make using Photoshop Elements because you can combine pictures and text. And for these kind of quilts, it's especially great because you can document your original photos that you used to create the images. So let me show you how to add text to your photos. I already have my photo of the rose. I've renamed it to a new file so I don't have to worry about that original image. I've given myself a little bit of a color background here to see the text. I'm going to click the text tool, and I'm going to select horizontal type. I'm going to click where I want to start typing. And I can type in the name of my quilt. Now if I don't like this color, I can select it. I can come up here and pick another color. But I like the white, so I'm not going to change it. I can add as much information as I want, just as I would type anything else. And if I don't like the font I have, I can come over here and select a different font. And it's as simple as that to add text. up till now, we've mostly been working in 8.5 by 11 sizes that print on our home printers. But what happens if you want to make it bigger? Doing panoramas like this one is one way, and they're very easy to do in the computer. I'm going to show you how to do it using Photoshop Elements version 6, but if you have an earlier version that doesn't have the panorama function, you can also buy an independent piece of software that does just panoramas. But let me show you how to do it here because it will be similar no matter what software you use. I'm going to go up to File, New, and I'm going to select the Photo Merge Panorama option. Now I'm going to go look for the files that I have of the photos. Now these are photos that I took specifically knowing that I wanted to create a panorama. So I took them in a sequence that would allow me to have them combined in the computer. So I'm going to collect all 4 of those and I'm going to say OK, so they'll open. And I'm going to say OK. And basically that's all I need to do. The software is going to kind of literally stitch them together, kind of like you or I might do on a sewing machine, but it's going to do it seamlessly so we won't have any idea of where one photo begins and the last one ends. And there it is. Isn't that just amazing? If you take a look at the sky in particular, you can't tell at all where one photo started. So all I need to do at this point is select my cropping tool because I want to clean up the edges. And I'm going to say OK to that, and I have my finished panorama. Now that you know how to create a panorama, let me talk about how to print it. And this is a test print that I've made on paper. To print the panorama, I'm using a software program called the Print Shop because my printer won't print an image that long without a special program. This is a real handy piece of software. In addition to doing banners, it does all sorts of other desktop publishing at home. You can do brochures, business cards, all sorts of other things. It's an inexpensive program, so it's really handy to have. The other things that you'll need to do your test prints, which are really important to do for banners, is paper. You can either use continuous feed paper like this that you can get at the office supply store, and all you need to do is tear off the sides before you run it through the printer, or you can make your own test paper by taping together just scratch paper, making sure you put the tape on the wrong side because the ink won't dry on it and it will smear, so you can create your own test paper to run through the printer. Now this is for testing. When you're ready to print your panorama for real, the easiest way to do it is to use fabric that's already on a roll, and this is easily purchased on the internet. So now that you know what all your supplies are, let me show you how to print it. Now I already have this set up in the Print Shop software. It's ready to go and print. Yours may look a little different depending on what program you choose to use to print your banner. I've selected print. I'm going to check and make sure that my output size is 100% and that I'm going to print all of the tiles, which means all of the different pages. Each one of these boxes is a different page. And what I want to show you in particular is the setup, because that's what's most important for printing banners. I'm going to go into my properties, and if I'm going to print a test, I'm going to pick Fast Draft. If I'm going to print it on fabric, I'm going to print it on normal. So we'll pretend that we're going to do the fabric. I've selected normal. Now I need to go down and check my paper type. And for this printer, I need to find it under Special Papers, and I need to select Banner Paper. I also need to go into my layout and make sure that Banner is selected for paper size. So now there's 3 places that I've had to check to make sure that I have Banner selected, and that's critical for these to print out correctly. Now if I go into Features, I can double check and I can see that it understands that I'm using banner size and it will print out correctly for me. From there, all I need to do is click OK, and I'll come back to my print dialog for the program, and when I select print, it will print for me. The one other thing I want to tell you about is when you do feed your paper into the printer, make sure that you feed it in very carefully. You need to make sure that it goes in straight, and your printer may move the paper back and forth a few times to make sure it has it aligned correctly. But once it does, it will take the paper, feed it through, And all you need to do is make sure that you guide it so that it goes in straight, and you'll have a beautiful banner. Here's an image that I've already enlarged. It's 21 inches wide by 16 inches high, and I can divide it up into 4 even pieces, which I can then print out on my printer. I can then cut it up into squares and make a window quilt like the one you've just seen, or I could simply sew the 4 sheets together and make one larger image. So let me show you how to divide this image up so I can print it out on 4 separate pieces of fabric. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use what's called the marquee tool. And because my image is 21 inches wide by 16 inches high, I can divide it into four equally sized pieces. The marquee tool has an option that allows me to set a fixed size so that I can make sure all 4 pieces are going to be exactly the same. So when I select fixed size, I already have it set to my width. So half of 21 inches wide is 10.5, and half of 16 inches high is 8. So now when I use the marquee tool and click, I'm going to have a little rectangle, and I'm not sure if you can see it. You can see the edge of it right here, and that automatically is going to be 10.5 inches wide by 8 inches high. The next thing I need to do is I need to go to Edit, because I need to make a copy of just that quadrant. If you remember before how we made new files, this time I'm going to go to New, and I'm going to say Image from Clipboard. And it's automatically going to paste that information into my new document. I'm going to minimize it so I can move on. All I have to do now is simply slide my marquee over to the next quadrant, and I would go through the same process. Slide it down one more time to get the lower right-hand corner, create a new document, slide it over one last time. I would end up with 4 equally sized images that I could simply print out just like we've been printing other things. If you don't want to divide your large image up manually like we just did, you can let your printer do it. And it's very easy. I've already selected Print from my menu, and I'm in my Print Properties. So I'm going to select Preferences, and I'm going to go to Features, and I have a poster printing option. When I click this button, it's going to show me here that it's going to divide it up into 4 sheets, 2 across. If I wanted it larger, I could select one of these other options, but I'm going to stick with the 2x2 for those 4 panels. And it's now going to print automatically, and I don't have to do anything. There are 2 specialty software programs that I want to tell you about. And the reason that I call them specialty is that each one does only one thing, but it does it really, really well. The first one I want to talk about is called Kaleidoscope Creator. And this is a program that's designed to do kaleidoscopes of all shapes and all sorts of sizes. And I have a few examples that I want to show you. The first one is a clock that I made, and I started with an image of a quilt that I'd made a few years ago. And one of the things that I really like about this kaleidoscope program is that I have the option to choose 12-sided shapes. And to make a clock, that's really important because each petal of this flower, for example, becomes an hour. This is a quilt that I made using 4 copies of the same kaleidoscope. And what I did is when I printed the kaleidoscope out, I used the peel and stick fabric that I talked about in the very beginning. And it made it really easy for me to print out each one, trim it down, and then print them so they overlap. I hope you can see each one has a corner here. And because I've used the peel and stick, I don't have to worry about any of the edges fraying. The third quilt I want to show you is a table runner that uses 4 different kaleidoscopes that have come from the same photo. And this started out as a photo of an iris, and this was made by Jeannie Summerall Ahero, who was the woman who created the kaleidoscope program. And what what I really want to say is this is a kind of program that once you start playing with it, you're going to have a hard time stopping. And I want to show you something else that I've done. When I made this kaleidoscope, I started playing with it, and what I did is I used the saved kaleidoscope and I made another kaleidoscope of that, which meant that I now had a multiple of my kaleidoscope. And once that was done, I just couldn't resist pulling it into Photoshop and using my change hue to make a new color version of it. And this is the kind of thing where I knew I had to stop, because otherwise I would have continued to play with both the colors and with different shapes. I'm sure you'll find yourself doing the same. Once you start playing with this software, you're going to have a hard time stopping. The other specialty software I want to tell you about is called Photomontage. And what this program does is it uses individual photos to create a mosaic image. A little bit like watercolor quilts, if you've ever made one of those that's made up of individual squares of fabric. This is a quilt that was made by Cindy Reimer, and it uses hundreds of photos that she took on her trip to Italy. Her central image is a Tuscan villa, and all of the photos that the program uses create a mosaic image of that villa. Here's another quilt that I made using that same program, but I only used one image. So I used the software, I created my mosaic, and then I took that file and I brought it into Photoshop, and I used a filter to create the swirl. I hope I've given you some ideas of how you can use your images on fabric and just how easy it is to create spectacular projects using your own photos. If you haven't printed out the PDF on this DVD, don't forget to do that so you'll have a complete list of resources plus the quick start guide for Photoshop Elements. If you want even more inspiration, these books are available at your local quilt shop, or you can order them online from C&T Publishing. Thank you for joining me, and have fun printing on fabric.
At Home with the Experts, C&T's new DVD series. These great DVDs from C&T's most popular authors are sure to delight quilters of all skill levels. Diana McClunn and Laura Nouns teach you all about how to get started on making a pieced quilt. Diana and Laura take you through each step of finishing your first quilt. Katie Pasquini-Massapust demonstrates everything you'll need to know to give you the confidence to create fabulous projects successfully every time. Anne Fahl shares her knowledge and enthusiasm for coloring with thread and demonstrates everything you'll need to know to give you the confidence to create fabulous projects. Sally Collins teaches quilters how to piece with precision. Great close-ups will give quilters detailed information on how to make beautiful quilts come together perfectly every time. Carol Doak teaches every step of paper piecing. She shares lots of tips about supplies, tools, and tricks for success to use on all paper piecing projects. In her friendly and warm style, Joyce Becker shares everything she knows about how to design and create beautifully embellished landscape quilts. Mary's story shows exactly how to make dozens of beading stitches. with step-by-step close-ups, this DVD will please both the beginner and more advanced quilter. Becky Goldsmith and Linda Jenkins take the viewer through all the steps they need to learn how to applique the piece of cake way. Each DVD features a gallery of quilts, which will inspire the viewer. These DVDs are a great new way for quilters to learn techniques at their own pace in the comfort of their own home. C&T Publishing, leaders in books and products for quilters and crafters.